So Brad, in Christianity, there are many streams
Mm,
of spirituality, and they tend to approach and understand divine spirit in different ways. You have the charismatic stream, you have the contemplative stream, mystic stream, which is, I guess, kind of connected to the contemplative stream. I'm wondering what streams have impacted your spiritual life and impacted your understanding and approach to the divine spirit.
mm. Well, you have more experience with the charismatic tradition than I do, but neither of us grew up um, in a tradition that even really recognized the validity of the charismatic stream. But I can't remember who it was. Somebody had said recently that if you're going to start in Christianity, that's probably the best place to start, in the charismatic tradition. And I found that really interesting, and parsing that a little. I think a lot of it comes back to, I know we've talked about in the past, um, what's going to sustain you over the long haul in faith is probably these encounters, these mystical encounters. Um, those are the things that you're going to be able to look back on. And because the charismatic tradition puts so much emphasis on them, it gives you a good library, you could say, of experiences with God. And of course, like that podcast you're mentioning, all of us then have to do the work of going, okay, maybe I've got to cut down some of those trees. Like maybe that was just the pads behind the worship, the pastor, and maybe that was just an experience you get at a concert. So maybe you have to wait through that. But I think having those experiences are absolutely necessary to sustaining faith over a long period of time. And without them, I think it becomes strictly a head game. And to be honest, that kind of is where the tradition I am most familiar with, is sort of Bible was central, and it's all what we make of this. So it's a head game thing, and if you figure it out right, then you're doing well. If you don't, you're not. And I think there's a lot of value to that. I've really appreciated that over the years, but it can end up being incredibly dry. And I think in those moments where if it's a dark night of the soul, or even just a period of dryness, the kind that happen every year, every week, sometimes there's a day that doesn't go well. I think those experiences are key, because I don't think you can put it this way. There are moments in life when you've had experiences with God where you might not be able to explain it, but you know that there was something very real there, and you might not have the language for it. And that's also a gift that traditions give us. Charismatic stream, contemplative, is they give us language sometimes, but maybe you don't have the language, but something. I encountered something there, divine presence. And I think that's, in some seasons, enough to keep you going. It was real, it happened. I can't just give up on faith because I have experienced the burning bush. I've, whatever that looks like. So I think it's really important to have those experiences. But yeah.
And the language piece. So who or what has given you the best language, the language that you're using now to talk about this stuff?
Like authors are we talking about, or yeah, that's a good question. I feel like part of my job at Nexus is trying to help people with language. So when I do a sermon like goat on the cow, right, it's maybe that's enough. That's weird enough to stick in your head that becomes a language. And I think part of our task in a culture that's very post-Christendom, very skeptical, cynical, is maybe giving people new language. But when you're in, say, a charismatic tradition, you've got the language around that, whether it's divine appointment or baptized by the Holy Spirit. Like there's a container to put your experience in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we detach ourselves from any tradition, we struggle, because I don't know where to put this. I don't have a container for it.
So you're just making up your own language? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, because I got to be careful. I'm not sure if anyone at Nexus will end up seeing this, but because the people I work with are largely detached from any tradition and very skeptical about attaching themselves to that. It's, yeah, how do I maybe give them language that helps them, even if it's not necessarily rooted in, like this Sunday, I'm doing a sermon on sin because I think there's something about the language of that that gives us a container to hold our experiences as humans, even though I know a lot of people hate that word. So, but I think language is important, and contemplative tradition does that as well, even if it's just naming the disciplines. Even that alone is, I think, all the different types of prayers, that alone can be a very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what has helped you become more sensitive and responsive to the flow of divine spirit?
In COVID, like I mentioned before, walking has become my main source, my main spiritual discipline. I think it was Mark Buchanan who talked about faithing your practices instead of practicing your faith. So finding those things that you do every day or are part of your routine, and you know, faithing them, imbuing them. So walking is no longer just walking, or you know, a lot of people into biking, whatever. It's not a big jump to move from walking or some of the practices we do to faithing it. Or for instance, this is great because it gave me an opportunity with the kids when COVID first came out. Everybody's washing their hands like 30 times a day to the point where your hands are blistering. You know, it was like the proper way is happy birthday, sing happy birthday twice. And I was like, I'm going to lose my mind. So what me and the kids started doing is we made it the Lord's Prayer. Wash your hands, say the Lord's Prayer, and then rinse off. And there was something very, you know, a lot of times it's just, you're just spitting it out. But again, it's just that simple reminder of, okay, your kingdom come, your will be, you know, you go through it and it's just a quick reset on the dial. But even the physical act of soaping up and cleansing off, there's something really good about that.
For many, Christian faith is about a belief system. How important do you think, and we've already touched on this, but this is more explicitly asking the question, how important do you think some kind of experiential encounter with the divine is to spiritual growth and faith today?
Yeah, we've been talking about this. I think it's really important, but I also know in my context, having talked about this, it can discourage people if I go too hard. For the person who hasn't had the experience, it can be, well, I don't measure up.
Yeah.
But I think it's incredibly important. I don't know how much else to say around that. Maybe you say this too much at your church, but what's that line that you were going to by the future, you'll either be mystic or nothing. Yes.
Carl Rahner. In the future,
yes.
A Christian will be one who has had direct experience with God, being a mystic, or nothing at all. Yeah.
Right. And I think maybe part of the task of the church pastors is helping people interpret their experiences. So when you talk about the older you get, the more the Spirit's work seems subtle, right? I think because people are so often looking for this huge experience, maybe part of our task is coaching people to say, you know what, maybe that thing that happened this week, I'm just going to put it there, but maybe that was the Spirit working. You know, like I'm not going to try to explain it away, but maybe I can suggest to you that was the Spirit at work. And allow people to go, I never thought that maybe I would encounter the Spirit in this way, whatever the case might be.
Yeah. How would you describe the flow of Spirit to someone without a Christian background, or to someone who has left Christianity and is allergic to our Christianese? And maybe that's something you're doing on a regular basis.
Well, sure, trying to, and I don't know. I find most people I talk to, even if they've given up on church, they do have these moments, that if you can get to a place in conversation where people are willing to go there, that something, they have these fragments, you could say, of experiences that they're not quite sure where to put that. And I think it's trying to help people. Yeah, how to do it without the language though is difficult. Because I know a lot of people, the moment you mention spirit and whatnot, are okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the ongoing challenge. I'm not sure I figured it out, but I think it's trying to identify those little fragments in life that they're not sure what to do with, and asking questions around that, and relating stories. I think that's
So,
a lot of what we do.
so you're sensing even the word spirit can be off-putting for.
I think so, because I think there are a lot of people today are materialists, and it gets uncomfortable for them the moment it goes outside of that. And I mean, maybe that is, I don't know if it's um, direct directly speaking to materialism as a worldview. I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful, or not. But yeah, I think people get a little spooked by people who talk spirit these days.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. I'll continue to do it anyway. Uh, have you ever sensed divine spirit active in people who are not Christians?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think a lot of this is expanding our notion of what the spirit does. So I believe our all creativity is rooted in the spirit, in the anything life-giving. The vitality of creating is rooted there. So, our neighborhood does a porch party, and all the artists get out there and do their thing on porches, and there's displays, and I'm like, that in a neighborhood where people sort of organically do that is, in my mind, very much a spirit movement that people are tapping into. I don't want to get too Star Wars, but the life force, of the universe, and to me that would be the spirit. And so even if they can't identify it as such, that's my interpretive lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I should probably rephrase that question, because it's a very arrogant question. but I'm also, being mindful of the majority of people who are going to watch this.
Mm,
Or it's that would be either a legitimate question, or it would be maybe even a scandalous question, or a question on the edge. So,
right, right.
but yeah, I just, I don't even know if I'll include this in, but it
Yeah.
I recognize that it's maybe a better way of saying is, do you, when you sense the spirit active in others, like is that the same as the Holy Spirit that the Bible
Mm.
talks about? Maybe that's a better way of, but
Yeah, no, I think it is, but
yeah.
then
Well,
you
so
get
do
in,
I.
you can get down into this whole prevenient grace thing, and which I buy in. I just think there, God's spirit is everywhere, always working, always nudging, and our task is to sort of find that and keep our eyes open. And I don't think it's exclusive to Christians. I mean, even in this environment temperature, anytime I come across a person who isn't stoking division and fear and isn't angry on social media, I'm like, oh, spirit clearly working in their life, because it would be very easy to give into the spirit of the age
Mm.
at 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 conflict, I would say, with the spirit of peace, and give into that temptation to be like, I'm going to go on social media and just wreck some things today, just be spiteful. And like, anytime I see somebody building bridges, and I'm like, some God's spirit's at work there.
Mm.
um and I need more of those people in my life too. So
Don't we all?
yes, yes.
Yes. I was part of a multicultural, multi-faith group. It was interesting that we had Hindus, we had indigenous, pretty sure we had a Sufi, but I'm not sure. Um, obviously had, yeah, there was Christian, there was Buddhist, many, many faiths and
Yeah,
spiritual traditions were represented at this table. And I just, man, it was an eye opener for me that I just felt there was more of a connection in spirit with these people than I have with most Christians. And that was
mm-hmm.
just really interesting to me how a part of it is what we're talking about, that a lot of Christianity is either nervous of spirit, or it's just not really, spirit isn't really a part of it, or it's some kind of superstitious magical thing where you're more that, like that pagan approach that we were
Yeah,
talking. And yeah, it I think that's a part of my reason for being so fixated on this, is I just see
yeah,
this as what it's supposed to be all about. It's
right.
about living in tune with and in harmony with divine spirit, the
Mm-hmm.
creator spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But that leads me to my final question, which is, have you ever experienced or observed something that is a big or even miraculous
Mm.
manifestation of spirit? And we've talked about this before, but it's an interesting question to struggle with.
Yeah, and I don't know, unless I told you something before that I don't remember. I don't know if I have, to be honest. I still remember the first time I heard speaking in tongues, and uh, that was a moment. But I don't know if I've ever, in terms of, say, the airport movement, I don't think I've ever. You went down there. I never got the chance. It wasn't even really on my radar, which is kind of wild considering it was right here at home. Um, not 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 really. Everything's been much more subtle in my experience, except for except for being in Africa,
Yep.
and that very different experience. So there, I saw some things that I still don't know how to really process, because I think there's a bunch of distorting lenses in my mind around how to see A, what I was doing there, B, how to see across cultural divides. So yeah,
So what did you see?
that's all I'll say about that.
Oh, really?
No, no, well, I don't know. I'm so conflicted about my time that I spent in Africa. Like, in hindsight, I just don't even know if I caused more harm than good by being there. I just don't
Mm.
know. But certainly within the churches, there was a lot of stories of direct healing, stories of I know friends who in Africa said they saw demon possession and exorcism. I never saw that, but I certainly met and encountered people who had stories um, of being delivered, and pastors there certainly that I interacted with certainly believed that, and that there's a spiritual warfare realm going on. Um, yeah, and I just don't know how to speak to that.
In one of our conversations, I forget who you were addressing, but you brought class into it, socioeconomics class into,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Well, Richard Beck has talked a lot about this, and I've really appreciated. Um, there was okay. This, yeah. Now you're sparking memory. There was a church downtown Kitchener, rooted in charismatic tradition. This was years ago, late '90s, early 2000s. I'm curious now if it was rooted in the airport movement. Anyway, but the connection between socioeconomics and how a church functions and performs, and whether it's that church downtown or what I've read through Richard Beck and his ministry with both prisoners and those lower on the socioeconomic ladder, is if we want to see the spirit at work, go there, because we're too busy middle class, educated, skepticism comes too easily to us, but for others, it comes the spiritual realm. Like what is conga lines? That's what Richard Beck talks about. Flags and conga lines in this church, that they do conga lines during worship and they're waving flags because there's a greater openness to just receiving the Spirit. Whereas I think educated middle class can be very skeptical of all of that.
Yep.
So I think if we want to see a greater diversity in churches, at least on the socioeconomic level, we need to be much more open to the Spirit working in ways that are more dramatic. And I don't think that's an easy ask of any church, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot I want to say about that. Yeah, and the same would apply to spiritual warfare, and
Yep.
like even in the African American Black churches I went to when I lived in the States.
Yep.
I mean, they just talk about the devil a lot, and
Yes.
they're often, singing down the devil,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very real. It's very real. To the spiritual realm seems much more tangible for them.
Yeah.
Than the typical, middle class, white church. Like
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are exceptions. That's another thing. Charismatic churches tend to be a bit more, cross-cultural and
Absolutely.
or multicultural.
Right.
And speaking of thin places, like I love visiting churches, and there is a space to a lot of charismatic churches that there's just an energy there that I can sense that is it's quite tangible. Whereas an old Mennonite church, not that there's a lot of really old Mennonite churches, but I may sense peace there, which would make sense. That's kind of the frequency we tend to vibrate at. But we need to talk about thin places. We'll do that another time.
I'd like that. I really like that. Is language I can I feel comfortable and at home in. But in terms of closing this out, I would say, when you're talking about the spiritual world turning into divine frequency, or taking off the blinders to be able to see, one of the things we need to wrestle with is not just, can I pay attention? Is it a mindfulness thing? But if socioeconomic status is one of the blinders, and that by virtue of being maybe more educated, that comes with a set of obstacles to it, that makes it hard to see or experience the divine. I don't know how you get rid of that necessarily, but it's just an obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any closing remarks on this subject, Brad? Maybe some practices that you'd recommend people try if they want to be more open to the flow of Spirit?
I think there's something about going with some of the classic ones. I've already mentioned walking. I do think fasting is an interesting, and that seems like one of the oldest. I think there's something, anytime we incorporate our body into a practice, I think that's powerful. I think because it engages all of us. So that, but I mean, there's plenty of disciplines to try. I would suggest, again, faith in your practices. So Lord's Prayer, washing your hands, whatever it is. But that's about it.
Well, good. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me, Avon and Troy. I appreciate it. Take care. Blessings.